As soon as she woke up from her dream, Josie traveled from the 21st century to Chicago in 1943 and became a poverty-stricken teenager wandering the streets. World War II. For Josie, who is not yet an adult, it is too far away. As an orphan, how he can survive in this era is the most important thing. Fortunately, he has a plain trading system. In this era, being a time and space master can also lead a comfortable life. However, a few months later, Josie, whose life had just improved, looked at Captain America, who was singing and dancing with a group of girls on the war fundraising stage in front of her, and fell silent. That's it, barbecue. Surprisingly, this is Marvel. Keywords of the novel. Meiman Surface Trading Machine without pop-ups. Download the complete set of Meiman Surface Trading Machine TXT, and read the latest chapters of Meiman Surface Trading Machine. Chapter 1. Gold Trading. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Gold Trading. In February, the weather in Chicago remains cold. Although it is now 1943, which is the height of the World War in Europe and Asia. However, as a city far away from the battlefield and also the most important industrial city in the United States, Chicago remains a scene of prosperity and prosperity. The bustling streets during the day, with a dazzling array of shops and gentlemen and beauties passing by, are no less lively than those of the 21st century. If it weren't for occasionally seeing various war posters posted on the streets, it would be almost impossible to believe that the other end of the world is currently engaged in the largest and deadliest war in history. But all of this has nothing to do with Josie. At this moment, he was wrapped in a coat that didn't fit his own figure, crossing the busy street and entering a roadside store. What do you need to see for yourself? Accompanied by the crisp sound of the doorbell, the elderly shopkeeper in the halls said without looking up. This is a grocery store, where everything from scissors and cutlery to radios and vinyl records can be seen, all arranged in a very orderly manner in their respective positions. However, Josie is not here to buy things, but to sell things. I heard you collect gold here. Josie walked straight to the counter and asked the old shopkeeper who was tinkering with an old radio. Upon hearing his words, the old shop owner looked up slightly and glanced at him. He saw a young man of 15 or 16 years old, and was slightly surprised, but still nodded. Without hesitation, Josie took out a pocket from her coat and opened it on the counter, revealing the gold jewelry inside. Ha! It looks a bit like Native American craftsmanship, but it's not very similar. Where did you get it from? The old shopkeeper said, somewhat surprised when he saw the gold jewelry in the bag. How can Indian craftsmanship be worth more money? Josie didn't answer, but asked in reverse. Not really, after all, it's not very in line with public aesthetics. The old shop owner shrugged, and the public aesthetics here are undoubtedly white people's aesthetics. The rough Indian craftsmanship may not attract the attention of those noblewomen, so the fate of these gold is only the fate of being melted. How much can you offer? Josie asked again, not caring about any craftsmanship, because he knew it was not even Indian gold jewelry. Don't worry, child. Wait a moment. The old shop owner comforted him and then turned around calmly to search for it. Josie, who saw the situation, was not in a hurry because he had also inquired before coming. This is a well-known old grocery store near this block, and it is also a pawnshop. And what he wants to sell is only gold, not any illegal goods. Okay. If we follow the law enacted by Roosevelt 10 years ago, buying and selling gold privately is indeed illegal, and even this law will not be completely abolished until more than 20 years later during the Nixon era. But in fact, since the Second World War, this law has not been as strict as it was at the beginning. In addition, with a large influx of refugees during the war, the U.S. government has turned a blind eye to private gold trading, so small amounts of gold trading are actually very common. Of course, the safest way is actually to sell gold to banks at a price of $35 per ounce, which is approximately 28 grams per ounce. But doing so would be too detrimental. Because the price of gold among the public has long risen to $50 per ounce. The difference of $15 is not a small number. After all, the purchasing power of the US dollar in this era is extremely strong. For example, in a big city like Chicago, a set meal with coffee, meat, and vegetables in a typical restaurant costs only 50 or 60 cents, while a big hamburger costs only 20 cents. That is to say, for ordinary people, even if they go out to restaurants every day, $15 is enough to feast and drink for over a week. And Josie brought a lot of gold this time, not much, 10 ounces. This is a whopping $150 difference, which is already the income of an ordinary person for 2 or 3 months. Don't be fooled by the fact that the per capita income in the United States had already reached over $1,000 in 1943. But everyone knows what they are, everything they know. In fact, the average person in the city whose annual income can reach $700 or $800 is already earning a high salary. Why did American youth actively join the military during World War II? Isn't it because the salary given by the military is high enough? Private soldiers earn a basic monthly salary of $50, and their ranks range from $10 to $20 per level. Basically, once they reach the rank of sergeant, they can receive $100 per month, not to mention various subsidies. So $150 is definitely not a small sum of money. Josie didn't have much gold in her hands, so she naturally couldn't bear to give up such a large difference to Bank of America, so she was willing to take a little risk. Fortunately, the old shop owner didn't do anything wrong, but quickly returned with some tools, such as measuring cups, water, scales, and so on. The purity of these gold is not too high, about 80%, and I can only offer a price of 40%, the old shopkeeper concluded after using a bunch of tools to calculate the proportion of gold. Transaction. Josie was not too surprised by the conclusion of the old shop owner, because the purity of this gold could not be too high. After all, the metallurgical level in that world was not advanced, let alone the barbarian gold that could not even be refined from steel. So Josie decisively agreed to the price offered by the old shop owner. Very good, a total of 9.8 ounces, and I'm not losing you either. Let's count it as 10 ounces. Here's $400, take your child. Seeing Josie readily agree, the old shopkeeper turned around and took out a roll of dollars from the counter. After pulling out 2, he handed the rest to Josie. Josie took the dollar roll, untied the leather band, and found 8 50 denomination dollars, no more, no less, just right. After all, the United States has not yet entered the credit card era, so large amounts of dollars are not uncommon. Unlike in the 21st century, it is difficult to see 50 denomination dollars on the market. Give me change for this 50, the best one is 5 yuan, and even 10 yuan is fine. Josie counted the money, confirmed the authenticity, and pushed $50 back. It's not uncommon, but due to high purchasing power, it's still inconvenient to have a little money around. The old shop owner didn't say much, just nodded and exchanged it for a roll of $5. After counting and confirming that there was no problem, Josie tied the money back together, put it in her pocket, and prepared to leave. Next time you have stock, you can still come to me. Old Hawk has a good reputation in this area. As he was about to leave, the voice of the old shop owner came in. Of course. Josie hesitated slightly upon hearing the words, nodded, and then walked out. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Crossover Josie. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Crossover Josie. After leaving the door and cautiously walking 2 blocks, confirming that no one had noticed him, Josie breathed a sigh of relief and immediately walked into a nice restaurant by the roadside. It has been a week since he traveled here, and he has tasted the best food, just a hamburger. Now that he has finally made money, he naturally needs to have a good meal. Well, that's right, Josie is undoubtedly a traveler. He was originally just a small white-collar worker in a third-tier city in the summer of the 21st century. The result was just a small drink with my heartbroken friend, and when I woke up, I was already in Chicago in 1943, becoming a 15-year-old boy wandering the streets. It's pitiful to see that although Josie was not a wealthy family in her previous life, she was at least a petty bourgeois youth with a car and a house, living a very prosperous life. In her early 30s, she was in the prime of her life. Although I often read online novels, I never thought about traveling through them. But it's the one who drank together, failed to start a business, and was dumped by his girlfriend who has been in love for 8 years. Life is quite a failure. Shouldn't the typical template for a time traveler be like that? Or did God tilt his hand when selecting people? Now it's better, living in Chicago for 43 years, enjoying the big family of the Starting Point Orphanage, eating every meal without stopping. The only benefit is that it has become 15 years old, saving a lifespan of over 10 years. But this lifespan is not that easy to pick up. After all, it's hard to say how long it can last in this era's environment. Another good news is that the original person was not always an orphan, and their parents passed away less than half a year due to an accident. They are all serious American citizens, rather than black households. In addition, although his deceased parents did not leave him much wealth, at least he still had a small apartment, which prevented him from not even having a place to sleep. Entering the restaurant, Josie didn't order anything particularly luxurious either. A large American patty, a portion of French fries, a portion of cheese and macaroni, a salad, and a large cup of Coca-Cola. The standard American blue-collar package comes in large quantities. As for the taste, that's all there is to it. It was the cola of this era that surprised Josie a bit. The taste was much stronger than the future Coca-Cola. Because she was in her prime of physical growth, Josie quickly ate everything. After finishing the meal, I paid 75 cents. Is it cheap? Actually, it's not cheap. If calculated based on the official gold exchange rate, this cost is actually equivalent to over $30 in the early 21st century. If it were during the economic crisis a few years ago, such a meal would not exceed 50 cents. The reason why prices are high now is still because during the war, supplies are relatively scarce. That's right, because we need to support the battlefields of Europe and Asia. Even the United States, a country that has not experienced war, began to see soaring prices in 1941, and since May 1942, the country has also started a material distribution system. Everyone will distribute a distribution book, on which plastic small brands with 48 blue dots and 64 red dots will be allocated each month. Blue dots are used to purchase canned, bottled and other processed foods. Red dots are used to purchase meat, fish, and dairy products. Ordinary people can only purchase supplies according to the allocated quantity. Only shops and restaurants can receive a larger quota, and all other supplies are supplied to the front line. On the front line, the distribution of supplies for an ordinary army soldier is basically 3 to 4 times that of the general public. It can be said that everything is prioritizing serving the war. This rationing system will basically come to an end in the second half of 1944 when the production of various goods in the United States reaches its peak and surplus begins to emerge. Of course, just like the 20-year private liquor business, as long as you are willing to spend money, you can also buy more goods. After a full meal, Josie left the restaurant and confirmed that no one was paying attention before relaxing and walking down the street, then calling a taxi. Don't be surprised, during the same period, Siagwama all had taxis, let alone the United States. Reported an address and the car started. I quickly arrived at a second-hand car dealership. As the world's largest industrial power of this era, the number of automobiles in the United States is extremely astonishing, reaching 25% by 1937. That is to say, on average, every 4 Americans own a car. The vast majority of them are concentrated in major cities. A first-class industrial city like Chicago is even more so. And the price of the car is not high either. A brand new basic Ford A-type sedan costs only $500 to $600. However, With the official participation of the United States in World War II, major American enterprises were temporarily banned from producing civilian cars and instead focused on producing military cars. Therefore, new cars are not easy to buy now, and like most supplies, a distribution system is also implemented. Basically, only special professions such as doctors and pastors can receive quotas. Also subject to quota restrictions are gasoline and tires. By contrast, driving licenses and the like are actually insignificant. Although some basic traffic regulations were introduced more than a decade ago due to the large number of cars, the time is still short and not as strict. So even though Josie's actual age is still slightly behind, as long as she spends a little more money, she can still get her driver's license smoothly. However, Josie doesn't have much demand for a new car, just a used car that can be used. After all, Chicago is so big, having a car to do things would be much more convenient. And although gasoline and tires are subject to rationing restrictions, as the saying goes, as long as you have money, everything is easy to handle. In the end, Josie spent $200 to acquire a used Ford that was fully fueled and in good condition. However, this also resulted in Josie's assets being reduced by $200, directly shrinking by nearly half. Upon receiving the car, Josie stumbled onto the road. Not to mention, I used to drive automatic transmission in my previous life, but now I have to drive this old-fashioned manual transmission again. At first, it was a bit uncomfortable, but these days the traffic rules are not as complicated as they were later, so Josie has been quite smooth on the road. Quickly, Josie drove to a relatively remote gun shop. Entering the gun shop, a variety of firearms came into view. Don't be fooled by the fact that firearms are not as advanced as later generations, but it should be noted that there is currently no automatic weapons bill in the United States, which was not promulgated until 1986. So now in gun stores in the United States, there are not only light automatic weapons such as the Thompson submachine gun, M1918 Browning, and Colt automatic pistol, but also heavy machine guns like the Colt M1895. It's simply amazing. But Josie just wanted to take a look at these guns because they were too expensive. In the early days, Thompson was extremely expensive, costing over $200 per handful. After years of improvement, the current price has dropped, but it still costs over $70, which is still the official purchase price. And due to the war, the retail price has also increased, directly priced at $108. At this price, with just the little money in Josie's hand, there are only 2 of them, and the bullets cannot be eaten. Similar to the M1 Garland, it is even more expensive, with a retail price of $150, which makes him hesitate. So Josie's goal is a vintage gun from World War I. Not Chuntian. Chuntian was also widely adopted during World War II due to its excellent performance, and its production capacity was insufficient and the price was high. Josie wants the M1917 as a supplementary rifle type to the Springfield rifle. Due to its relatively simple structure, M1917 was produced in large quantities during World War I, but was dismantled and partially sold after the war, with over 1 million units sealed off. After World War II, although this type of rifle was reintroduced, it was mainly used for support to other countries or for training purposes by the U.S. military, and was rarely used in actual combat. Therefore, the stock in the United States remained huge, and the price was very cheap. Carrying 1,000 bullets in a row costs only $45, which can be considered quite cheap. Basically, during this period of American folk hunting or shooting competitions, many people would choose to buy this gun. "What do the guests want?" the chubby gun shop owner asked, and next to him was a young man of the same age as Josie, who was also chubby, probably his son. "I need 4 M1917 and give me another M1911, Josie said directly. The rifle was prepared for sale, while the M1911 was prepared for his own self-defense. Although Josie had some unexpected requests for 4 rifles at once, the shop owner didn't ask much. He had experienced the Great Depression and had never seen anything before. Dillinger had bought a gun from him before. Anyway, as long as we give the money, what does the customer buy a gun for? It's none of his business. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Plain Trader. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Plain Trader asked the boss to help carry the gun onto the car, pay the money, and Josie gets on the car and leaves. However, after turning a few corners, Josie stopped again, brushing all the guns and bullets with her hand, and everything disappeared in an instant. Then he safely drove back on the road. Half an hour later, Josie finally returned home and was very lucky to not encounter any trouble along the way. Perhaps due to a large number of unemployed young people running to join the military, the security in Chicago during this period seemed to be quite good. At least during the week when Josie traveled, he did not see any serious security crimes. I have never seen a scene in a gangster movie where the gangsters are holding Thompson and thrusting directly on the street. Of course, not seeing Josie doesn't mean she doesn't exist. After all, whether it was the past 20 or 30 years, or the next 20 or 30 years, it was a period of brutal growth for the American Mafia. If Josie had come a few years earlier, the scene of gangsters wearing coats, hats, and Thompson submachine guns thrusting on the street in movies would have been more common. The reason why he can't see it now is that the security in the blocks he frequently frequents is relatively good. In this era of ZZ isolation, black can't be seen on the streets. And another reason is war. Don't think that war has nothing to do with gangs. The relationship inside has grown. One is what Josie thought, a large number of unemployed young people wandering the streets have all joined the army to earn money, and the fresh blood of the gang has relatively decreased. The second one is that most gangs are currently busy making money. Why do people join gangs? After all, isn't it just for making money? And during the war, what is the best money to earn? Smuggling. No, it can no longer be called smuggling, it should be called transportation. During the war, in order to support the European war and mitigate the enormous risks of maritime transportation, the United States almost completely opened its maritime restrictions on Europe. As long as you are brave enough, any free ship loaded with goods can exchange tens or hundreds of times more wealth from the UK, Europe, or Asia. Is it better to work hard than to compete for territory in the United States? So during the years of World War II, most of the gangsters in the United States were busy engaged in foreign trade. Of course, this is definitely not the whole thing, but the rest either cannot be brought to the forefront or has nothing to do with ordinary people. Therefore, overall, during the war, the security in white neighborhoods was naturally much better than before the war began. Josie, who returned home, locked the door and sat on a chair. System. Contact Danielle. As the words fell, a virtual screen appeared in front of Josie. And this is an important guarantee for Josie's survival in this era, as well as his golden finger, a system from an unknown high-dimensional civilization called a face trading machine. The function of the system is also very simple. It has a plain beacon, which will be randomly sent to an unknown world to choose a host. Then Josie can trade with the host of this beacon. And the system also generates a new plane beacon every year to search for new planes. In addition, the system also has an extremely powerful storage function. The previous guns in the car would disappear because Josie used the storage function. And the first plane beacon of the system, the world searched for, is the world of a TV series that Josie had watched in a previous life, The Game of Power. And the host is not anyone else, it is the famous dragon mother Danielle Tangrian. The 10 ounces of gold that Josie had previously traded was his first deal with Danielle. The items used for trading were a .38 revolver left by Josie's deceased father and a book on monarchy. The M1917 prepared by Josie this time is also intended to be used to trade more gold with Danielle's, of course, silver is also acceptable. Josie, have you bought something? The originally dim screen lit up, dressed in simple clothes but with a neat and beautiful face, and a silver-haired dragon mother appeared on the screen. The time point when the plane beacon binds to the Dragon Mother is exactly in the 6th season of Kuan Yu. Dragon Mother is captured by Doslak and then uses the flames to kill many of Doslak's leaders, gaining the loyalty of the Doslak tribe and preparing to return to Slave Bay to quell the rebellion. When she conquered Slave Bay again, it was time for her to lead the 3 dragons, the army of the Unscrupules, and the army of Doslak to cross the strait and counterattack the continent of Westeros. Of course, you see, this is a rifle, both in terms of power and range, it is several times that of a handgun. Josie waved his hand and a 1917 shot appeared in his hand from the system warehouse. Then he began explaining the use of a bolt-action rifle to Danielle. Of course, live-fire demonstrations were definitely not possible. If a shot really needed to be fired, the police should also come to his door. Very good, is it still the same price as last time? Danielise didn't care about this either, because she had already used a handgun before and knew the power of this weapon called a firearm. Any thin and weak person can easily kill a well-trained soldier with a gun, which is many times better than a crossbow. That definitely won't work. Pistols have low power and are cheap, but rifles are different. Their power is very great. Believe me, Danielise, even the best armor and shield in your world can't stop them from shooting within range. Josie shook her head and said, he wasn't fooling Danielise either. Although the M1917 has been basically phased out among the US military and can only be used as a training gun, it does not mean that it is inferior. In many countries around the world, it is still a desirable good gun, and even years later, soldiers in Xia country were still equipped with a large number of this rifle, and on the battlefield of Bangzi, they taught a lesson to the arrogant US military at that time. This rifle has a high initial velocity, high bullet kinetic energy, high range, straight trajectory, and excellent accuracy, far superior to well-known rifles such as the .38 large cap. In addition, during World War I and World War II, the bullets used by various countries were all full-power bullets with excessive power. In terms of penetration ability, it was definitely a drop in the bucket. Although the Song of Ice and Fire is a magical world, apart from the legendary destroyed Valyria, the smelting level of ordinary human kingdoms is not high, and the previous low-purity gold has already shown the problem. So Josie doesn't think that Westeros has any armor or shield that can withstand the shooting of this rifle. Oh. What price are you talking about? Seeing such a firm promise, Danielle's interest increased a lot. Although her previous pistols also amazed her, she understood the power of the classic .38 revolver. It may be okay to wear leather armor at close range, but it's not easy to say when facing steel armor. Triple. Josie said directly, don't think it's expensive. The previous pistol only had 50 bullets, but this time the rifle comes with a bonus of 100 bullets. Well, when Josie bought the gun, it was 1,000 rounds, but now he's planning to only send 100 rounds and sell the remaining bullets separately. Anyway, this is a unique business, and I'm not afraid that Danielise won't buy it. Otherwise, there will be guns but no bullets, just like a fire stick. If the power of this gun is indeed as you said, then this price is not unacceptable, Danielise nodded. When she returned to the slave bay, she really didn't lack gold. The wealth accumulated by those slave owners was extremely large. If the power of this gun is as Josie said, then if both the Unclean and Dorak's armies are equipped with such magical weapons, coupled with the adult three-headed dragons, who else in Westeros can stop her footsteps? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Need for helpers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Need for helpers. With a hint of ding, Josie and Danielle completed the transaction. Danielle's warehouse had 4 more rifles and 400 bullets, while Josie's warehouse had an additional 120 ounces of gold. And unlike the previous transaction, which involved some gold jewelry, this time all the gold was fused into one gold nugget, exactly 12 nuggets. Obviously, Danielise also prepared a large amount of gold in advance for trading. Although it was two different worlds, language, text, and measurement were actually different, but these differences were automatically converted or translated by the trading system, which was very convenient. Seeing so much gold added at once, Josie couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. This is a whopping 3.4 kilograms of gold. If calculated based on the price of gold before his crossing, it would be a whopping 1 million soft sister coins. Although his financial conditions were decent in his previous life, he had never seen so much cash besides real estate. I have seen more gold than this, but it is also in the gold shop. Suppressing the urge to play with gold, Josie prepared to shut down the system. How to monetize so much gold needed to be considered more. Although the previous sale of gold went smoothly and the shopkeeper named Old Hawk seemed reasonable, the amount of gold has directly increased by 12 times. It's hard to say what will happen now. Wait, Josie. But just then Danielle stopped him. Is there anything else? Josie asked somewhat unexpectedly. After all, at this time Danielle's was quite busy on her way back to Slave Bay with the Dorak's army to quell the rebellion. I really like this book on monarchy, especially the description of the qualities that a monarch needs to possess. It left a deep impression on me. If I had read this book a few years earlier, the current situation in Slave Bay might not have been as chaotic as it is now. However, the content of this book is still quite limited. For example, the book does not introduce the detailed information of the monarchs mentioned. I am very interested in the experiences of these monarchs, so can you help me find some more books about these areas? Danielle said, holding the monarchy book that Josie had previously traded to her. As an exiled princess, Danielle grew up in constant exile and did not live a few days of peace. So don't talk about monarchy education, even the basic education received is very imperfect. In the past, when there were fewer people and less land, there was not much feeling. But as the power of her subordinates grew stronger, Danielle's weaknesses in this area began to emerge. How to reconcile the contradictions among various forces and social classes in one's territory, how to manage one's subordinates, how to govern the place, and what kind of monarch one should become. These are all the learning she needs. And this has also become one of the biggest reasons why she is still stuck in the Slave Bay. Due to a lack of governance experience, the various city-states in the Slave Bay have been constantly rebelling, not only failing to sustain the growth of her power, but also constantly consuming her original resource power. As for her several important subordinates, although they were also helping to teach her what kind of monarch she should become, such as Tyrion, who had just joined her for a while. But these people all hope to make Danielle the monarch they expect, rather than really helping her become the monarch she herself expects. In the past, Danielle couldn't see through this and simply felt that she wasn't doing well enough, leading to constant compromises. But this book may seem thin, but the monarchy theory that hit the nail on the head everywhere made her understand a lot. Danielle has been able to take this step to the present, and her comprehension ability is very strong. In the past, her vision only limited her. And as she obtained the plain trader, she contacted Josie and saw this book on monarchy. A brand new world has already unfolded before her. She also became interested in various related literature and history of the world in which Josie lived. Of course, but it will take some time, after all, there are quite a few books related to it. Josie agreed without any hesitation. As the only trading partner at the current stage, Danielle's rapid growth is a good thing for him. Only when Danielle quickly matures and becomes a qualified monarch, can she possibly avoid many detours in the original plot in the future, and not be as sorrowful as the final death in the original. Only in this way can Josie maintain a trade with Danielle. If Danielle dies, the plain beacon will search for a new host, and this process is completely random. If the new host is also a lord, aristocrat or similar, it's okay, but if it's bound to a beggar or some other person with nothing, it's not very fun. Josie still needs to spend her energy supporting the other party and wait for them to have some financial resources before making a deal with her. So the first plain beacon can find a wealthy and powerful host like Danielle's, and Josie's luck is actually very good. It's hard to say whether there will be such good luck when the new beacon is produced next year. Therefore, in addition to trading with Danielle to make money, Josie is also happy to help more Danielle in other aspects. Even if it weren't for worrying too much about stimulating Danielle, Josie would have wanted to tell the other party the plot of Kuan Yu in one go. That's really thank you. Originally, after returning to Slave Bay, I was planning to go to Westeros as soon as possible. However, now, I plan to study for a while more and accumulate more strength. Additionally, if possible, I hope to equip the entire unscripted legion with this type of rifle, said Danielis. This may not be something that can be achieved in a short period of time, after all, I am different from you. In my world, I am just a small person. It's easy to talk about dozens or hundreds of guns, but it's not that easy to talk about 8,000 guns. Josie said helplessly when she heard Danielle's words. Although the United States cannot help but purchase 8,000 guns at once, it is obvious that they can only buy from arms dealers. If she does this, Josie will inevitably walk to the front of the stage. As a young man who is only 15 years old, he possesses a wealth but lacks the power to match it, and may be eaten clean in just a few minutes. At the end of the day, it was Josie who was alone and lacked help. But trustworthy helpers are not so easy to find, especially for Josie. Josie Kahn, whose full name is Josie Kahn, is of Austrian descent, and to some extent, he is from the same hometown as the bearded man. 5 years ago, when Littlebeard annexed Austria, his predecessor's parents fled Austria with him and immigrated to the United States. When they were in Austria, their family had some assets, but in order to escape, most of their original assets were sold at a low price. After arriving in the United States all the way, they bought this small apartment and basically belonged to the extremely poor class. My father found a job at the port to support a family of 3. Although I have been in the United States for 5 years, the speed of my family's integration into the local society is not fast because only my father understands English. Although my predecessor also studied in the United States for a few years, besides becoming slightly proficient in English, I didn't actually learn much, and due to my personality, I didn't make many friends. Unfortunately, just over 3 months ago, when their predecessor was not at home, the couple at home ate an inadequately pickled sausage and died of food poisoning, resulting in a very hasty death. For a 15-year-old boy who has not yet delved into the world, this is clearly a huge and unparalleled blow. Even if it weren't for the help of the community priest, the original body wouldn't know how to bury their parents. And that would have basically cost the little money left by their parents. Since then, Yuanshire has never gone to school again. After 3 months of confusion, it was replaced by the current Josie. Such monotonous interpersonal relationships make it impossible for Josie to find a trustworthy friend and relative. Upon hearing Josie's explanation, Danielle nodded to show understanding, as she had also experienced Josie's current predicament. But when it comes to reliable helpers, should I send you a few clean hands? Danielis thought for a moment and said. Unscrupulous. Upon hearing Danielle's words, Josie couldn't help but feel a little moved. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The car is gone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The car is gone, that's right, in terms of reliability and loyalty, who can match the soldiers of the unclean, said Danielis. Plain traders can trade life forms, but compared to regular trading, the trading of life forms is slightly more complicated, and the traded object must not resist or have no resistance ability to do so. However, it is evident that this issue does not exist for those who have no successors. The unclean ones are an army created by the slave owners of the Slave Bay, who castrated their slaves from a young age and underwent dehumanized training without freedom, status, or emotions, with only endless obedience. Before encountering Danielis, these soldiers had almost wiped out all human colors, including body, emotions, pain, and so on, leaving only 100% obedience to the owner who purchased them, fearless of death and torture. It was not until Danielle arrived at the slave bay and deceived the slave owners into giving them the scepter to command them, that they were granted freedom and dignity. Therefore, this fearless army is also completely loyal to Denise. So as long as Danielle speaks up and allows them to be traded as merchandise to Josie, they will definitely not have any resistance. It has to be said that Josie was very tempted by Danielle's proposal. Although the unclean warrior may not be mentally capable due to being a slave, it is perfectly suited as a guardian. If there were dozens of unscrupulous soldiers, teaching them how to use guns, not to mention confronting the CPD, Chicago police, head-on, but gangsters and so on, Josie wouldn't have to be afraid at all. You don't have to be as careful when exchanging for gold as you are now. As for whether having a few more people around him will cause unnecessary trouble, there is no need to worry too much. After all, the world is at war now, and major port cities in the United States such as Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York have gathered many refugees who have obtained visas and can only live in specific refugee camps. Although Chicago should be essentially an inland area, its ports can be directly connected to Europe along the Lawrence River. This is also an important reason why there are so many Italian and other European immigrants in Chicago. So as long as Josie spends a little more money, it's easy to grant refugee status to the immaculate and legally obtain American status. After careful consideration, Josie ultimately rejected Danielle's proposal. Sorry, Danielise, your proposal is great, but I also hope you understand the importance of trading tools to us. I still don't think it's appropriate to let anyone except ourselves know about their existence, because it's a risky behavior for us, even if the risk is minimal. Josie shook her head and said, "You're right, I was a bit impatient." After listening to Josie's words, Danielle thought about it and didn't say anything more. After disconnecting communication with Danielle, Josie breathed a sigh of relief and waved her hand, revealing a heavy gold nugget in his hand. Josie couldn't help but kiss the gold bar in her hand. Gold is such a wonderful thing. After a moment of self-indulgence towards the gold, Josie got up and packed her things. Looking at the sky outside, it wasn't too late and she was ready to go out for dinner. Although there is still some bread at home, he has been eating that thing for almost a week now, and in the short term, he definitely doesn't want to eat that thing again. Although the majority of the US dollars exchanged in the morning have been spent, there is still a few dozen dollars left, so there is no need to compromise oneself. Josie tidied up her clothes, checked the M1911 she bought during the day, loaded it, and put it in the system warehouse before leaving the door. Mr. Khan. However, just as he was going downstairs, he was stopped by a person wearing a uniform. Josie recognized the clothes on the other person and was a member of the property management company. Is there anything else? Josie was a bit puzzled. Mr. Khan, this is your property management expense bill for the past 3 months. We didn't disturb you before because of your parents' passing, but it has been so long, don't you think? It turns out that the other party came to ask for debt, but their attitude is still good. What surprised Josie a little was that she didn't expect property fees to already exist in this era in the United States. Of course, this can only be said to be Josie's lack of knowledge. In fact, the concept of property management fees had already appeared in the UK as early as the 1860s and soon spread to the United States. Although it is still only the 1940s, the system in this area in the United States is already very complete. Although Josie was surprised by this, she still accepted the bill. Fortunately, the property fee was not expensive, as it was just an ordinary civilian apartment. The monthly property fee was 42 cents, and it was only over 1 yuan for 3 months. He immediately took out the money. Seeing Josie pay, the other party also showed a relaxed smile. For property management companies, they are not afraid that homeowners will not be able to pay the property fees, because property companies in Europe and America have always been very impressive. When homeowners accumulate a certain amount of debt, they can submit it to the court and directly auction the owner's house through judicial procedures. Before Josie's travels, she had just watched a news story about a Chinese-American female doctor in the United States who, due to conflicts with a property management company, maliciously refused to pay property fees. As a result, millions of houses were directly auctioned off at a low price, and violent resistance was carried out during the police's doorstep delivery of the judgment, which led to her being caught off guard. However, property management companies are not afraid, which does not mean that employees who collect property fees are not afraid. If they cannot receive money or are complained about by property owners, it will also affect their bonus income. For them, it is only better to do less than to do more. By the way, does your property management company have any agency business for selling houses? Josie paid the money and casually gave the other party a 10-cent tip before asking. Well, Mr. Khan is preparing to move out, the other party asked, somewhat surprised when they heard Josie's words. Well, that's right, after all, this is my sad place, you know, so I'm planning to leave here. Josie pretended to be sad. But it's true that he's not planning to continue living here. After all, this apartment is too small, the safety factor is average, and even though it was the parents of this body, Josie still feels uncomfortable. Previously, there was no way to do it without money. And now, as long as all the gold in the system warehouse is sold, not to mention a luxurious mansion, it is still enough to buy a 6-bedroom house in a high-end community. Of course, this doesn't mean Josie has to buy such a big house, after all, he's alone and can't use it. And he has to keep most of this money as operating funds. So he is only planning to rent a more upscale apartment in the short term. I see, the company does have the business of selling real estate as an agent, and now small apartments like this are also very easy to sell. If Mr. Khan needs it, I can help you contact him. The other party nodded and said. Could you please let me know if you have any news? Josie nodded without saying how to notify, because it was unnecessary. Although the apartment was average, there was also a security guard at the entrance of the building. Whenever he was at home, the security guard could be seen in and out, so there was no need to worry about not finding anyone. After negotiating with the other party, Josie walked out of the apartment. Then the originally good mood suddenly became less wonderful. Because the spot where his newly purchased second-hand Ford car was supposed to be parked is now empty. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Little Italy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 7. Car Thieves. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Car Thieves. Influenced by various Mafia movies such as The Godfather of later generations, as well as various Mafia legends such as Al Capone and the Five Families, it is easy to give people the illusion that Italian Americans are easy to get by in the United States. But the fact is completely opposite. For a considerable period of time in the United States, the least favored white ethnic group was Italians, rather than Irish people as many people thought. In almost all gangster movies, gang bosses are mostly portrayed as Italians, which in itself is a form of discrimination. In addition, in the movie Green Book, the police refer to the protagonist of Italian descent as half-black, which also illustrates the awkward situation of Italian descent in America at that time. Half-black, a derogatory term used by white people of Anglo-Saxon descent to refer to Italian descent, which lasted for almost a century from the 19th century to the mid-20th century. So why did Italian immigrants, who were once the cultural center of Europe, encounter such a predicament? The reason is simple. Most Italian immigrants to the United States come from southern Italy. Just like the United States has a north-south distinction, Italy also has a north-south distinction. The northern part of Italy has a developed industrial and commercial industry, so it is relatively prosperous. In contrast, the southern part is more mountainous and has fewer resources, making it relatively poor. Rich Italians from the north are generally less likely to choose the United States if they want to immigrate, but rather South America. Because the influx of Italian immigrants was relatively late compared to other European countries, and at that time the distribution of resources among different ethnic groups in the United States had already been established, wealthy Italians would rather choose a wider South America for development, hire indigenous and black people to explore the land, and become their own bosses. In contrast, poor Italians lack capital, so they choose to go to the affluent North American region to work for already developed Americans. That is to say, the Italians who come to the United States are all poor people with very low levels of cultural education. In addition, as Southern Europeans, Italians have a closer Latin ancestry and significant differences in appearance. In addition, Italians like to live in groups, industrial workers, social distancing, lower class attributes, and low education level. These attributes combined can easily lead to negative associations. At the same time, it also led to Italians in the United States being able to only do some of the lowest level jobs for a long time and unable to reach the upper echelons of society. The same thing that Italians have encountered is the neighboring Chinatown. Especially during the presidency of Coolidge, a 1924 Immigration Act was specifically enacted targeting Italian Americans. This bill is not well known, but its impact on Italian immigrants is actually no less than the anti-Chinese bill, targeting Chinese people. This naturally caused dissatisfaction among a large portion of Italian Americans. What should we do? It's obvious that you're a gangster. The Mafia, which had a relatively stable system in Italy, was brought to the United States with surprisingly good results. In addition to being discriminated against, Italian Americans have since added a gangster attribute, which not only makes them fearful but also more excluded. It is precisely under the influence of this reputation that Josie naturally has a sense of fear towards the Little Italy neighborhood. After much hesitation, Josie still decided to go in. After all, the car he bought at noon was stolen in the afternoon, and he had never experienced such great frustration in his previous life. But before entering Little Italy, Josie first lifted her collar, covered her face, and then walked into a gun shop across the street. Well, there are many gun shops, sometimes it's quite convenient. To enter the renowned Italian region, Josie felt that having only one M1911 was definitely not enough. He needed 2 Thompson and a spray gun, which were shotguns. Although he is a traveler and has never been a soldier in his previous life, Josie knows how to use guns. Whether it's a submachine gun, an automatic rifle, a bolt-action rifle, or a shotgun, Josie had contact with a shooting club during her previous life's trip to the Bears, and also hunted in the Far East, spending a lot of money on it. Even in his previous life, Josie's predecessor, before his father's death, was taken out hunting with only a rifle. So I may not be proficient in guns, but at least I can use them. Quickly, Josie picked up a Chicago typewriter that the Mafia loved the most from the gun shop, which was Thompson. In addition, there was an M1918 Browning automatic rifle, a shotgun, and corresponding bullets. Equipped with a gun box. It cost Josie nearly $200. After buying the gun, carrying the gun box, turn into an empty alley, assemble the firearms into a chamber, and then store them together with the gun box in the system warehouse. After finishing all of this, Josie calmly entered the Italian region. Perhaps due to the bright daylight, although the streets of the Italian region may appear dirty and emit a smell of sewage, there are actually no idle thugs on the roads, and there are still many differences from the black neighborhoods of later generations. Although there are many Italians working in gangs, just like the neighboring Chinatown, there are more hardworking lower-class people who are actually busy making a living during the day. It only appears chaotic at night. So Josie's preparation along the way was completely useless. However, after patrolling 2 streets, Josie couldn't find the car and couldn't help but feel a bit discouraged. It seemed that the other party was only passing through the Italian area. However, just as Josie was about to give up, she suddenly saw the entrance of an old warehouse in the distance, revealing half of the cars. But Josie looked around and made sure no one was paying attention before walking towards the warehouse. As the distance approached, he also saw the full view of the rear of the car, and the prominent scratch stood out on it. At this moment, He also heard conversations coming from the old warehouse. "Listen, Joe, this is just an old Ford from over a decade ago. Even if it goes on the second-hand market, it can only be sold for a maximum of 200 yuan. I have to deal with the joints, so I can only offer you 50 yuan at most based on the price of the old parts. If you're not satisfied, then go find someone else," said a slightly hoarse voice with a strong Italian accent. "Don't be like this, Mike. You should know how difficult this job has been lately. At least give it a little more. 10 yuan, just add 10 yuan, okay," said another slightly greasy voice. "Be careful to approach the warehouse, Josie can easily see the situation inside. There are two people inside, one is a middle-aged man with Mediterranean hair and oil stains all over his body, and the other is a slightly chubby young man with a short stature. It is easy to tell from their conversation that the young one is the car thief, while the middle-aged man specializes in selling stolen goods and collecting black cars. The various car parts scattered throughout this warehouse also indicate that it is a black car trading factory. And besides his old Ford, there is another car parked." Quickly, Josie's gaze was drawn to this car. That is a famous Cadillac V16. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. What I Robbed is the Mafia. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. What I Robbed is the Mafia. The Cadillac V was released in 1930 and ceased production in 1940. One of the top luxury cars before World War II, the world's first mass-produced model with a 16-cylinder engine, only accepts customization and has low production. In 11 years, only over 4,000 units were sold, with an average selling price of $8,000. When Josie bought a car yesterday, she also saw one at that used car dealership. That used car dealership itself is also one of the largest used car dealerships in Chicago. At that time, the seller directly quoted $9,000, which is twice Josie's current total value. The terrifying price directly caused Josie to retreat. That's right, it's also a used car. Their used car depreciates, but this used car appreciates in value. And the car in the garage is still a silver-gray convertible version, full of artistic sense. By contrast, Josie's own 1934 Ford 730 Deluxe is simply an industrial waste. Josie immediately fell in love with this domineering luxury car. I didn't expect such an underground car dealer selling black cars to be able to get this kind of car. Just accepting customization means that the owner of the Cadillac V16 is definitely either rich or expensive. After all, the high price of $8,000 is not something that ordinary wealthy people can afford. So theoretically, those who can own this type of car are definitely beyond the reach of ordinary car theft gangs, and even car thieves dare not steal. Therefore, the appearance of this car in such a place is quite abrupt. But Josie doesn't care either. Since he saw it here, then this car is his. Just Josie didn't go out directly, but first took off his coat, took out a leather jacket from the system warehouse, put it on, and then put on a hood. God knows when he prepared it. After preparing everything, Josie finally took out the newly purchased Thompson from the warehouse and walked out like this. "Who are you?" "Oh, sir, what can I say?" Upon hearing the commotion, the two people in the warehouse immediately looked over alertly and scolded. But after seeing Thompson in Josie's hand, the two of them instantly raised their hands and their tone became gentle. Josie is very satisfied with their attitude. Look, these Italian Americans are not quite kind. How could it be portrayed so badly in a movie? Don't worry, I just need a car. Where's the key to this car? Josie asked the middle-aged Mediterranean man in a muffled voice through her face mask. "Oh no, sir, you can't drive this car. This is what Mr. Scappa wants. If you drive away, he won't let us go." Seeing Josie asking for these two keys to the Cadillac V16, middle-aged Mediterranean immediately became anxious. "Scappa? Who is that?" Seeing the attitude of the Mediterranean, Josie couldn't help but feel a little curious. Mr. Scappa is a senior member of the Moretti family, in charge of the entire red light district of Chicago's East Side. Mediterranean replied, "This is the car he wants, it's just temporarily left with me. Someone will come to pick it up in the afternoon. If you drive it away, we won't be able to survive." The Moretti family. What kind of person is that? Josie asked. "Sir, have you just arrived in Chicago?" said the chubby young man beside him at this moment. "What's going on?" "No, what's going on?" Josie asked back, to some extent, he did just arrive in Chicago. The Moretti family is one of the largest mafia families in Chicago. If you have been living in Chicago for a long time, it is impossible not to know this name. Friend, I advise you not to offend them if you still want to live in Chicago. The chubby young man flattered. "Oh. It sounds really impressive, but you can tell me about the major powers in Chicago." Besides Al Capone, I really don't know anyone else, Josie thought to herself. Hey, Mr. Capone is naturally worthy of our admiration, but it was more than 10 years ago after all. Now Chicago is up to the Moretti family, Clementi family and Wenzi family. The final say, well, maybe also the triad. The plump young man told Josie about the power of Chicago slightly. Although Josie was not prepared to go black, she listened with great interest. The other party's eloquence was very good, which made Josie feel like she was listening to storytelling. "I didn't expect you to be a car thief. The news is quite good. What's your name?" Josie asked after the other person finished speaking. "My name is Joe Barbaro, just call me Joe." "He's Mike." "Sir, when we meet, we are friends, and we can't let you come for nothing. As long as you don't touch this car, the things in this warehouse, whatever you like, take whatever you want. By the way, there should still be a lot of money in Mike's safe, and you can also take it." Facing Josie holding Thompson, Joe's chubby face smiled like a chrysanthemum overnight. "You're a very witty person, but unfortunately, I just want this car. Now I'll say it again, take out the car key." However, Josie's words changed, obviously not taking the other person's warning seriously. Josie's words immediately made Joe and Mike's faces collapse. They had just talked so much about their feelings, and this gentleman didn't take it seriously. "Sir." Joe still wanted to speak. "Shut up, either give me the key or die here right now. Don't think I'm being fooled. Since this car will appear here, it means that you are either members of the Moretti family or working for the Moretti family. Even if I don't take the car and take something else, will you be willing to give up afterwards?" Josie sneered, "So what about the Mafia? What I stole is the Mafia." Undoubtedly, getting involved with the Mafia is not a good thing, but since the other party stole his car, the issue has actually been settled. Not taking this Cadillac away, besides making it easier for the two goods in front of us to explain, is not of much significance. And what Josie wants to retaliate against is this car that stole his car. How could Joe make it easier for him? Even if she didn't want to attract the police, Josie had a sudden heart for these two goods. So now Josie doesn't care whether she offends the Mafia or not. More importantly, since entering the Italian street, he has been half covering his face with a coat, and now even more so, with the tracking and reconnaissance technology of this era, as long as he doesn't show his face, ghosts can find him. Faced with the threat of gunfire, although Mike was reluctant in every way, he could only slowly take out the key from his pocket. Also, take out the key to that car, the key to the safe, and tell me the password. Josie pointed to his old Ford. You'll regret it. Faced with the gunshot, Mike could only continue to follow suit, but he didn't forget to speak harshly. I don't know if I will regret it, but if you say one more thing, I'm sure you won't even have the chance to regret it, Josie sneered. Now, you two get in the car. With the key, Josie opened the door of the Ford car. After the two of them got on the car honestly, Josie closed the car door and then locked it. In this era, car locks are basically the same as house locks, and can be locked from the inside or outside. If a person locked inside doesn't have a key, they won't be able to get out unless they break the window. But as long as they dare to smash the window, Josie, although she has never killed anyone, doesn't mind being sudden. After locking them up, Josie still shamelessly added a pot of coffee to the Ford car's fuel tank under their gaze. After finishing all of this, Josie began searching the warehouse. And his main search targets are naturally desks and safes. Open the safe, there isn't much money inside, only a few hundred yuan. However, there are quite a few ration coupons available. There are gasoline, candy, alcohol, and coffee, all of which are controlled vouchers. The quantity is not very large, but there are at least 4 to 5 people. During this special period, these things are more valuable than simple money. Without hesitation, take these ration coupons into your pocket. I searched the office desk again and didn't find anything good, but there is actually an M1911 that is the same as the one he bought before. Following the principle of wild geese plucking their feathers, Josie also put them away. Later, Josie collected a lot of the tires from the warehouse in a corner of the car that the two of them couldn't see, and put them into the system warehouse. In this era, only the big and small beards had a large production of practical synthetic rubber, and all tires in the United States were made of natural rubber. In addition, Southeast Asia, which is an important producer of rubber, is blocked by footpot chickens, so the United States currently only has South America as its rubber source. This has led to tires becoming a strategic resource even more important than gasoline during the war. In the end, Josie, who had finished searching, drove away from the warehouse in a Cadillac under the angry gaze of 2 Italians inside the Ford car. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Hitchhiking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Hitchhiking. Driving out of the warehouse and onto the road, Josie took off her headscarf. Although it was a convertible, Josie had already raised the soft top before leaving, so as long as the collar was raised, it was impossible for outsiders to see his appearance clearly. And Josie didn't directly drive this car home either. After all, a Cadillac V16 in this era is just too conspicuous. If Josie drives this car home, it's like telling the Mafia that he stole it. So Josie drove straight out of the city. Then I found a deserted forest not far from the city, collected the car, and took out a set of unused clothes from the system warehouse to replace them, burning the original clothes. Perfect. Let the Mafia go find it, turn Chicago upside down and see if they can find it. The only troublesome thing is that without driving this Cadillac, he would have no means of transportation. The distance of several kilometers from the urban area now is neither too much nor too little. Josie doesn't want to walk back. So after leaving the forest, he came to the roadside and prepared to hitchhike. The culture of hitchhiking in the United States had already emerged in the 1920s when cars began to become popular, so it is not a new thing. Of course, there are risks involved, but this is a suburb of Chicago, and those professional road robbers are unlikely to operate in such a place. Unfortunately, there are so many guns in Josie's system warehouse that are not vegetarian. However, even if ride-hailing culture is prevalent, not all car owners will be happy. The first few cars ignored the waving Josie. Fortunately, his luck was not that bad. After more than 10 minutes, a car that had just passed him suddenly slowed down and came to a stop. Josie quickly ran a few steps to catch up. This is a very beautiful convertible car similar to the Cadillac V16 with Josie's gun. Of course, just like the previous Josie, the hood of this car is raised. After all, the weather is still quite cold now. If you really want to open the hood, it can make people freeze into popsicles. The flywheel goddess emblem on the front of the car reveals the identity of the car, Packard. Few people in the 21st century have heard of this name because this brand had already ended its history in 1958. But in the United States in the 1920s and 1940s, the Packard was a well-known luxury car brand, just like Cadillac. The logo of this brand is not limited to one type, but can be categorized into three types based on different production times and models: Flywheel Goddess, Swan, and Crystal Goddess. Among them, Flywheel Goddess has the highest number and represents its peak period. For example, seeing this Packard 8 is a very classic one. Although the price may not be as high as the Cadillac V.16, it still costs over $2,000 for a reliable luxury car series. However, when Josie saw the driver in the car clearly, she found that the car was beautiful, and the people in the car were even more beautiful. That's right, the driver is a female driver and an extremely beautiful young woman. With snow-white and delicate skin, bright red lips, delicate facial features, and a signature golden perm of this era, a smooth fur coat exudes elegance and grace, making her a contemporary American beauty. "Hello, pretty boy, have you encountered any trouble?" The beauty in the driver's seat smiled and asked Josie. In fact, she was originally planning to ignore Josie, but with a casual glance, she saw Josie's appearance and involuntarily stopped the car. There's no way, although she still looks a bit immature, Josie's appearance and figure are really impressive. The iconic golden brown hair and light blue eyes of Germanic people, paired with delicate facial features, and without freckles. Although he is not yet 16 years old, he is close to 1.8 meters tall and has a very upright posture. The only drawback is that the predecessor was slightly lacking in nutrition and exercise, appearing a bit thin, but this actually added some feminine beauty to Josie. Of course, this feminine beauty is similar to her brother's, not just about eating peaches. So, no matter what era, having a good skin bag is not a bad thing. This beautiful young woman also saw Josie's handsomeness, otherwise she wouldn't have stopped the car in such a place alone. "Good afternoon, beautiful lady. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was left in this wilderness by a friend's prank, so I hope you can give me a ride." Josie politely asked for help. "Oh, poor child, it seems that your friends are not very good. Get in the car quickly, child, don't get cold." Upon hearing Josie's words, the other party immediately warmly invited him to get in the car. "What's your name?" When Josie got into the car, the beautiful woman started the car and asked. "Josie, Josie Kahn, what do you call madam?" Josie asked, and there was no problem with madam's voice. After all, the other person placed a large diamond ring on the left ring finger of the steering wheel, which was still very prominent. Diamonds from this era, although not as valuable as those hyped up in later generations, are not cheap either. And the diamond ring in this lady's hand, which is at least 10 carats or more, also known as a pigeon egg in later generations, may cost millions of dollars in 60 years. Even though diamond marketing is still in its early stages in this era, such a diamond ring is estimated to cost nearly $10,000. Wow, this is a very wealthy woman. Of course, it's not impossible for a diamond ring to be fake. But judging from the other party's attire in these two car paths, the probability is not high. "Margot Wendy's," Margot replied with a smile. "Hello, Mrs. Wendy's, you are such a kind and beautiful angel. If it weren't for you, I would have had to walk several kilometers hungry before I could go home," Josie complimented. "Oh, Josie, you're really good at coaxing people." Upon hearing Josie's compliment, Margot was obviously also very happy. "Madam, I didn't coax you. I'm all sincere," Josie said solemnly. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life." Well, he didn't lie, at least for the rest of his life after being reborn. This Lady Wendy's is the most beautiful woman he has ever seen, even Daniel's is far inferior to this one. Especially the mature feminine charm, which is completely lacking in the petite figure of Long Mama. And for some reason, Josie always felt that this lady looked a bit familiar. Could she possibly be a celebrity? But his understanding of the celebrities of this era is limited, and he can't recall them at all for a moment. "Come on, let's go lie to those little girls like this." "It's not good for me," she said casually, but her smile indicated that this lady still likes this trick. "Madam, are you a female celebrity?" I feel like those Hollywood actresses don't have your good temperament, Josie asked tentatively. Is this a compliment? But I'm afraid I'll disappoint you. I'm just an ordinary housewife, Margot smiled and shook her head. An ordinary housewife. I believe in your evil. Josie looked at the luxury car under her, skimmed over the huge diamond and luxurious fur coat, and silently rolled her eyes in her heart. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Türkiye Cuisine. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Türkiye Cuisine. Under Margot's driving, the car quickly returned to downtown Chicago. Along the way, due to Josie's deliberate flattery in his experience as a traveler, Margot and he had a pleasant conversation. Josie also gained a certain degree of trust from this beautiful young woman as a result, and through conversation, understood the general family situation of this beautiful young woman. As Margot said before, she is not a celebrity, but just a housewife. But this housewife is not ordinary, as Josie thought. Her husband is a tennis star who is active on various courts throughout the United States without leaving home. But that's not the point. The focus is still on Margot himself. Her father is a famous jeweler and real estate developer in Chicago, and he is also an only daughter. After her father passed away 2 years ago, all the property naturally fell on her. So whether it's luxury cars, diamond rings, or any other luxury items, she actually spends her own money. In contrast, although her husband is a tennis star, the income of a sports star in this era is completely incomparable to that of future generations, and he cannot afford the luxurious consumption of the family. On the contrary, in order to maintain a decent life, he also needs Margot's support. Therefore, Margot is indeed a reliable wealthy woman. Josie couldn't help but marvel at her dog's luck, as she could have met such a top-notch woman with just a free ride. Just from the conversations along the way, Josie could also feel that this lady had a relatively simple mind and was not satisfied with her current life, especially with her husband who was away all year round. Although Josie may not have any special thoughts about Margot because of this, there is no doubt that it is not a bad thing to know such a woman from the upper class of Chicago. Especially since the other party's deceased father was still a jeweler, this means that if Josie can have a good relationship with Margot, he may have a safe way to sell gold in the future. For the jewelry industry, hundreds and thousands of kilograms of gold are not a problem. And this is also a win-win situation. For jewelers, having an additional source of goods is also a good thing. The Roosevelt administration's control over private gold made it not easy for the jewelry industry to obtain enough gold. Of course, while extracting Margot's personal information, Josie also quietly revealed some of her own information. For example, the death of parents, and being alone searching for a new place to live. And to some extent, this also aroused Margot's sympathy and took the initiative to provide help to Josie. Speaking of houses, my father once developed a community in Evanston, which was not very good, but it was also a very safe community. The vast majority of them have been sold, but I still have a few buildings on hand. You can go and take a look, Margot recommended. Oh. I don't know how the price is. If it's too expensive, I might not be able to afford it. Josie asked with some emotion when she heard Margot's words. Evanston belongs to the satellite city of Chicago. But this does not mean that Evanston is not good, on the contrary, it is extremely good. Because it's in the northern part of Chicago. What is the northern part of Chicago? That is a serious wealthy area. Although Evanston is just a satellite city, the environment doesn't need to be much different from the North District. The famous Northwestern University in the United States is located there. And the place where Josie used to live was in the near North District, although it also had a northern border, with an additional character, the environment was vastly different from the real northern urban area. Of course, compared to the black communities in the South, as well as Little Italy and Chinatown in the Southwest, the Irish communities in the West are still much better. What? Why isn't there an Eastern District? Of course not, because to the east is Lake Michigan, so there is no strict definition of the East District, only the Lakeside District. Buy it. No need to buy it. You just need to stay, it's still empty anyway. Margot shook his head. You're just a child. When you're an adult and working, you'll have time to talk about it. She truly considered Josie, who is now alone and not yet 16 years old, so it is basically difficult to find a good job. How can that be done, madam? Don't worry, my parents also left some assets before they passed away. Although it wasn't much, it was basically enough to buy a regular house and support me until I reached adulthood. However, Josie refused Margot's kindness without even thinking about it. Although he does have the intention to use Margot, he will not seek this advantage. Although the housing prices in Evanston are certainly not low, they are not as high as Sky High. Okay, but there's no need to rush about the price. Let's take a look first. Do you have anything else to do? If not, why don't I take you to see it now? Margot said. Well, there's nothing wrong with it, but I haven't had lunch yet. Madam, since you've come back from outside the city, you probably haven't had time to eat yet, have you? Josie didn't expect this lady to be so attentive to her own affairs, and naturally couldn't resist it. However, before that, he still wanted to fill his stomach. After all, Josie is currently in the age of rapid physical growth and is so hungry that she doesn't eat a meal. And in the morning, Margot went to the horse ranch located in the west of Chicago to ride horses. Well, that's also Margot's private property. And based on the time he returned, he probably didn't have lunch either. When I was at the racecourse, I had a little tea, but when you said it, I did feel a bit hungry, Marg nodded. Can I have the privilege of inviting the beautiful lady for lunch? It's also my gratitude, Josie immediately invited. Of course. I happen to know there's a great restaurant nearby, Margot readily agreed, then turned the steering wheel and drove towards the lakeside. About 10 minutes later, we arrived at a restaurant by the lakeside that looked very upscale. But to Josie's surprise, this very good restaurant in Margot's mouth is not the French food he imagined, but a Türkiye restaurant. Okay, it's also one of the 3 major cuisines in the world. To tell the truth, Josh hasn't eaten much Türkiye food in his last life or this life. Of course, there is no mention of the 3 major cuisines in this era, especially Chinese cuisine, which will dominate the world's top 3 cuisines in the future, is not popular in this era. No way, the limitations of the times. After all, catering is also a culture, so its popularity is closely related to the strength of a country. The true popularity of Chinese cuisine in the world did not begin until the scene of Nixon's visit was broadcast in the United States in 1972. Türkiye cuisine is different. Türkiye's geographical location is at the junction of Europe, Asia and Africa, and it has more contact with Europe. It is greatly influenced by the Mediterranean culture. The cooking method, serving procedures and dining etiquette are also closer to Western food, and it is naturally more well-known in Europe. So in this era, for European and American countries, the popularity of Türkiye cuisine is much higher than that of Chinese cuisine. End of this chapter.